wonderful parents. Today, I'm going to give you a whole presentation of all the things you need to teach your child how to read. Just go over the overview of why we need to teach our children how to read, what you're going to need to do to teach your children how to read, how you can have success no matter what age or what level they're at, if they're a beginning reader, if there's someone who's further along but needs a little extra help. So it's a little bit of a longer presentation today, but I've really chocked it full of everything you need to make this experience successful for you and your little one. So let's go ahead and get started. And I want to start off by answering the question, why me? Why am I here doing this? And why do I believe you are the perfect person to teach your child how to read? So it actually starts all the way back with me learning how to read. Now, I started struggling to learn to read, but in school, I did a great job hiding, as many struggling readers do. So I hid behind being shy. I worked really hard to memorize things. I was a people pleaser, and nobody in school ever noticed that I was struggling. Now, there's a lot of safeguards in place today that didn't exist when I was in school. So we are a lot further along in making sure, every kid is reading aloud to their teacher and reading aloud on tests, but back then that didn't exist. And nobody in school ever noticed my struggle, but my mom did. So she actually noticed because my sister was a little brainiac reader and started reading super young. And around second grade, when I still was not making any progress, she started seeing red flags and found a dyslexia specialist that was like 2 hours away from our house and had me evaluated. And when I was identified as dyslexic, she pulled me out of school and put me in, private dyslexia therapy for 2 weeks. And it was these 2 weeks that would change my life forever, all because my mother saw me. But these kind of resources aren't available to every child. Every parent doesn't know that these kind of resources exist. Every family can't afford these kind of resources. And I just really want to make sure that everybody can have access to how kids learn to read because it's too important to be anything but free. And even though my mom saw me, I had this deep-seated belief in myself that I was less than because I couldn't do something that my peers could do when I was in those early grades. So I looked around and I thought, man, I am just not as smart as everyone else. And it wasn't until I became the Louisiana State Teacher of the Year in 2024 that I realized I'm kind of smart. I'm kind of good at things. And that's not bragging. That's me realizing that all of those years ago, Tiny Kylie was super smart, and learning to read has nothing to do with your intelligence. But the journey can be really scary. But what's beautiful is that there is no one more equipped to see your child than you. And if you take an active role in their reading journey, you can be that inner voice that they hear when they're learning how to read. So I want to make sure there are no tiny Kylies out there thinking they're not as smart as they truly are just because learning how to read might be a little bit hard for them. And hopefully we can get them everything they need to where learning to read is never actually really hard for them. So that's why I believe, that's why I kind of set on this path. But your most important job as a parent is to make sure your kid loves reading. So if you make this really stressful, if you have a lot of high expectations, and every time you guys sit down to read together, somebody gets frustrated, either they get frustrated or you get frustrated, you're actually going to have reverse effects, right? So you want to make sure that you start teaching them how to read when you feel ready. For me, that was the summer because I had a little bit more time than the school year as a teacher, but maybe that looks like a break, or maybe it looks like, a certain like time when you have a little extra time in the morning. It doesn't take a ton of time, but it does take some. So you want to make sure that you personally have the time so you can be relaxed. I also think setting out on a mission for connection, as opposed to setting on a mission to teach your child how to read, can help make this just like happy time with you and your kid. Like put your phone away, stick them on your lap, or let them run around while they're doing it, and just make it a special time with you and them, and make sure it is filled with joy. So if they make a mistake, we're laughing. We're talking about how mistakes are good things. Mistakes are how our brain grows. And it is okay if the journey takes some time and you feel like you're doing not very much as you start, as long as you guys are having fun reading together. So when we start learning to read is actually not quite as important as a lot of people think. Now, I started teaching my daughter how to read at the age of 4, which is pretty young, but I started purely because I have dyslexia, and dyslexia is very hereditary. So if you struggle to read as a child, it's very likely your child will struggle to read. Maybe you weren't diagnosed with dyslexia. It's 1 in 5. I'm going to talk more about that later. And it's not even just about dyslexia, but I wanted to be the one to notice the red flags. So I started at the age of 4 with her. But there is actually a lot of very cool research that learning how to read early doesn't necessarily put you on a path to be a better reader. However, what is important is something called the Matthew effect. So once you start learning how to read and you become a good reader, you start believing in yourself, you start wanting to read more, you start picking up books more. And the more you pick up books, the funny thing about reading, the more you learn and the better you are at reading because you're being exposed to more words, you're being exposed to more topics. Whereas our poor readers, they're going to improve at a slower pace because maybe they're reluctant to pick up a book. Maybe like me, they don't think they're a good reader. They don't see themselves as a reader, so they read less books. And when you read less books, you're going to learn at a slower pace. And my beautiful sister and I are a great example of this because she was an early reader and she loved reading. This child was reading chapter books. I swear in kindergarten, I still am like, my mind is blown by her all the time. And she viewed herself as a really good reader. And she picked up books and kept reading and kept reading and kept reading. And I looked at her and said, well, she's the good reader of the family. And so I read less and less and less. Now, today as adults, we are both, very successful, and it's okay that I didn't have that kind of growth early on. But what has still shocks me whenever I have a conversation with my sister is her vocabulary. She knows so many words because she's been exposed to so many words in books. So this Matthew effect is very real, and I still feel it in my own life. So the benefit of learning how to read early is that kids can see themselves as good readers and then they can start reading more books. However, you as a parent kind of have the ability to shelter them and make sure that they can love reading and be exposed to books and be exposed to literature, even if they aren't great readers just yet. So some ways you can prevent the Matthew effect, maybe if your little one isn't reading yet, or maybe if you're not ready to start super early, that's okay, but you still want them around a lot of books. So some ways you can do that is reading aloud to your kids all the time. Also, audiobooks count as real books. Let your kids listen to audiobooks. At the library, you can typically get a subscription to Libby free with your library card, and it has so many audiobooks you can listen to, your child can listen to, and also picking like high interest, lots of pictures. Graphic novels count as real books. So getting kids books in their hands in many different forms, even if they're not great readers yet, so that they can have a connection with literacy from the start, or if it's later, that you can help them build that love of literacy, even if they're not fluent readers on their own yet. So let's talk about what it means to build a reader. So this right here is the simple view of reading. So the simple view of reading just is a concept that explains that word recognition times language comprehension will equal reading comprehension. So if your little one is getting a passage, maybe they're in 3rd grade and they're being asked to read the passage and answer the questions and they can't do it, the reason lies somewhere here. So we either have a deficit with word recognition or with language comprehension, because first we have to learn to read and then we can read to learn. But this doesn't just apply to early readers. If you were an older reader in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade who didn't get this foundation when they were in foundational grades like kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade, you can't continue without it. So we have to make sure that even with our older readers, we figure out if they don't have reading comprehension, where's the problem? Is it with our word recognition or is it with our language comprehension? So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into what those two parts look like. So word recognition is where Read with Kylie is. Okay. So I've built this entire website to help with word recognition specifically because this is where I struggled as a kid. So my mom was the mom who read every single book in the world. She sang every single nursery rhyme. She had letters, she had sounds. She was doing all the things, reading to us all the time. And for my sister, that worked. And for me, it didn't. So I wanted to make sure through Read with Kylie, you have everything you need to build this part of the reading brain. So I just want to show you this ladder of reading and writing because you might look at some of the things on my website and say, well, I didn't learn how to read with phonics, or I didn't learn how to, decode all of these words. But all the research tells us that only 5 to 10% of students are what we think of as like these natural readers. They listen to us read, they pick up a book one day and they're reading. And if your kid is there, that is great. Let's extend, let's accelerate. You absolutely still need to focus on spelling with them and still teach them the patterns because it's going to help build them into a better writer. But that's only 5 to 10%. So if your child is here, that is great. But we still want to advocate for all kids to get what's called structured literacy. So it's reading instruction that is explicit. It's going to teach kids sounds, teach them how to break down sounds. Like, boom, right here, I'm telling you how to do it. There's no guesswork about reading. And what's really beautiful about this reading ladder is that all kids benefit from this kind of instruction. So not just where I was, this 10 to 15% that's going to need a lot of support, reading, spelling, and writing, right? But also this 40 to 45% of kids that are going to need some extra help. But even these kids up here in the green, they benefit from reading instruction that is rooted in word recognition. It allows kids to break down the sounds of words, put them together, take them apart. We're decoding, we're encoding, we're reading, we're writing. All kids benefit from this. Now, they benefit at different paces, which is another huge benefit of why you teaching your child how to read is so important because you can move at their pace. You don't have 20, 30 children in a room that you have to, manage and differentiate with. You can just listen to your child and go as fast or as slow as they need to go. If you're teaching them a new skill and it takes them 2 weeks, that's okay. If it takes them one day, move on. You have the luxury to do that in your own home. So word recognition, I have done all the work for you. It's all here on Read with Kylie. The other part of the reading brain is language comprehension. So that is if they can hear the language and read the language and actually understand what like words mean, right? So not just how to read them, but what they mean. And I think what's really fascinating here is the power of background knowledge. So there's been a lot of studies again on this. I won't nerd out too much on research, but just to show you a quick one is that kids, when they have background knowledge on a topic, shine. So this passage was on baseball. Our kids who had background knowledge on this topic are over here. You see our good readers just were able to soar with it. But even our struggling readers who knew things about baseball, they know words like pitcher, catcher, the diamond, they know it's not just a shape, but the bases around a baseball field are going to be able to read and understand that passage better than kids with no background knowledge. Even our great readers here, that if they don't know about the topic, it's going to be harder for them to understand it. So background knowledge and knowing a lot about a lot of different things is essential, is actually one of the most essential things in building a reader. So kids need to be spoken to. They need you to talk with them. They need you to learn with them. Just taking the moments to talk about life around you, about nature, about any vocabulary words. If you're reading a book to them and there's a big word in there, or even a small word, we're pausing, we're asking, do you know what that means? Let's figure out what that word means together. And the best way to do this is just taking your child to the library and reading books aloud to them. I always, always, always stress to myself, my kids, my families, get nonfiction books. Every time you go to the library, we want to read those storybooks, but we also want to read books that have information and learn how to peel that information from books, but also just learn together, like whether it's about space. The more topics you can learn about together, the more likely your child is to soar as a reader. So what does it mean to be a struggling reader? Now, I talk a lot about dyslexia, and that is because it is estimated 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. And I think a lot of people are scared to say it, but I'm going to say it here all the time. If you struggled to read as a child, it is really likely that you were just not diagnosed with dyslexia or identified with dyslexia. So I'm not afraid to say it. Now, not all struggling readers do have dyslexia, but I'm just going to throw it out there, right? But some ways to recognize a struggling reader is if your child is having a hard time reading, even with structured literacy instruction. So what does that mean? Structured literacy instruction is built in to Read with Kylie, right? So they're going to get it if you're hearing sounds, if you're reading words, if you're writing words, if you're talking about how those words are broken into patterns. But some ways to know if they're getting structured literacy in school is one, to ask their teacher, to ask what curriculum they're using. We can do some research about those curriculums, and they're always going to say structured literacy if they are structured literacy curriculums. And a lot of states have passed a lot of legislature about reading, and teachers are getting a lot of great training about reading. But it is okay to ask if your child is seeing, structured literacy, and you'll know if they're starting to say those sounds in words as they're reading is another huge cue. So if they're getting that good instruction, right, and they're still struggling, then they might be a struggling reader. They might need a little bit of extra help. But if they haven't been exposed to those things and they're not able to read passages, they might not be a struggling reader. They might just need exposure, right? So even if you're older, I've worked with kids who are in 5th grade. I was a K-5 reading specialist, and kids in 5th grade, kids in 3rd grade that just haven't been taught those patterns explicitly and systematically, they don't struggle once they've been taught them, right? It's really easy to fill those gaps. So don't be stressed and don't be concerned if your child isn't blossoming yet, but they just haven't had the exposure. Where we want to, kind of raise the alarm bells and get some extra support is if they have had great instruction and they're still struggling. Also, from a really early age, if they have difficulty hearing sounds of words out loud, right? So if I'm saying like, oh, no, and they have a hard time putting that together into no, or if you're asking them like, ooh, I'm wearing a hat, hat. What did we hear at the beginning of hat? If they're having a hard time hearing sounds and words, that can be a really easy early indicator, because we used to think signs of dyslexia didn't pop up until around 2nd grade. You can notice them incredibly early. Some research is also saying like ages 1 to 2, because it is a neurodiversity. It's in your brain. So it's there from birth. It's nothing you have to wait to see signs of. So if you're hearing those difficulties, it is okay to ask early for some extra support. And the most one that is so common is family history. If you struggled, that doesn't mean your kid is going to struggle. My own daughter is just healing my inner child every day with how much she is just soaring with her reading since I have done all of this with her. But it is a great indicator that your child might struggle too, which is the reason why I started early and started being involved. So if your child is a struggling reader, we need to figure out where we start. So like I said, where I live and I focus is this word recognition piece. And why I think it's so important to start here is because if we know how they're doing on word recognition, if they're doing great, we know it's language, okay? And we're going to get language support. But first, we have to figure out if it's word recognition. So we're going to do this thing called the Core Phonics Survey. And in my next slide or video, I'm going to teach you exactly how to do that and even do it with your child. And after you know where they are struggling, I have written this whole course called The Rules for Reading with a whole parent guide that will break down every single one of those skills that you can fill in all of those gaps. So we've got this. We're going to figure out if it's word recognition. If it's not, it's the language, and we're going to start talking and doing all those vocabulary and reading aloud with our child. But we are going to figure out where exactly they might have some gaps in the word recognition part of the simple view of reading. I just want to close out and just remind you that it is never too late. If you are finding my page as a high school parent, your kids in high school, if you're finding my page as a fifth grade parent, that is okay. All people can learn to read, right? It's everybody is going to take different amounts of time, different amounts of exposure, but you do not ever have to give up. And I just want to remind you that as long as your child is feeling supported and loved by you, they are going to be okay. Stress is the enemy. Okay. You don't want to be worried about grade level benchmarks and all these things. Yes, they're incredibly important, but when you're sitting down and reading with your kid, you have endless time. You can do this because the school year doesn't end when the grade ends for you. Okay. You can work with them all summer long. You can work with them the next year. You can keep working with them. You can get them more help if they need it because it is never too late to learn how to read. And I just want to remind you that I was a late reader and I am doing just fine. So I am here with you. I am here along this journey. I'm here as a kid who struggled to learn to read and came out even better for it with even like amazing strengths because I learned how to kind of persist through that struggle. So we've got this together, but just don't forget that loving reading is your most important step.